What happened in the last episode?
We discussed dog ownership, basically. Why you might like to get a dog, whether it's your right or your privilege to get a dog. The correct breed or breed mix for you or your family. Was sort of centred around that, really.
A child will turn up to your program. What will they get out of it?
They will get an interactive 30-minute session. There's 4 of them, and they will learn how to identify the signs that a dog's going to give, hopefully, in order to avoid an unhappy confrontation.
Now, we all know that a child has a memory retention of about a gnat or a Shih Tzu.
Shih Tzus are quite smart. They remember a lot of stuff.
Not mine. How do we keep them interested?
The program's interactive, so they won't just be sitting in their chair looking at a blackboard. There's a lot of stuff for them to do, and hopefully it will hold their interest because kids love talking about dogs. In my experience, there's very few kids that don't particularly like dogs, and if they don't like them, there's usually a reason.
So give me the structure. They turn up, they sit down, the teacher claps her hands and says, you know, if everyone's happy, clap your hands. They all welcome here, Miss Susie, and what happens in the first 5 minutes?
We just have a little opening discussion. Often the kids want to tell me about their dog and all that sort of stuff. So we limit the questions only because it would take me the whole course duration to answer the kids' questions. Then I introduce Dudley, who is our big toy dog, and we just go through a few basic things. Like I ask the kids where they think they should pat the dog, for example, where on the body is okay to touch and all that sort of stuff. And that gives me an idea of really where they're at and what their understanding is. They also learn a mantra. So they have to sort of stand up and repeat that to me. There's 2 little mantras actually. One of them is stand still like a tree but don't look at me. And the other is that they learn to look away, back away but never run away. So they have to learn that, and they will. They'll memorise that, and hopefully that's the kind of thing that they can remember if they're confronted with a dog and they feel that they're in danger. Part of the problem with kids is that they don't really listen to their intuition. You know, that feeling that I know that the sort of law enforcement try to describe or get kids to describe is that funny feeling that you get when something's not right. A lot of kids ignore that. And so my aim is for them to not ignore that. That's their intuition telling them that something's not quite right. So, but generally, the look away, back away, never run away is actually counterintuitive. It's, it totally is opposite to their fight or flight response. So that's something that needs to be addressed.
You said earlier on that you teach them where they can pat a dog. Do you actually encourage them to pat the dog?
No. But what I want them to understand is if it's a dog that they do know, obviously they're going to have contact with that animal. And most dogs love being patted. There's just those areas that are no-go. You know, a girlfriend of mine, her little girl was playing beautifully with this rather large collie, and the dog had had enough and she got up to leave, and Tilly wasn't happy with that, and she grabbed the dog's tail to drag the dog back to her, and of course the dog took exception to that and bit Tilly on the face. So there's little things like that. Tilly's quite young, but she can learn as well. And pulling a dog's tail is just rude. It'd be like me pulling your hair, well, not your hair, but pulling hair to get somebody to stay. You're going to turn around and punch them in the throat, aren't you? Don't pull my hair.
How long does the session run for?
30 minutes.
Is that it?
There's 4.
Do they get lunch?
4 30 minutes. Yes, I take them to the pub afterwards. If we go in single file,
do we?
Apparently that's the school rule.
Do they get a certificate?
Yes, they will get a certificate of completion. They also get a little colouring in stencil, which is fun. So that's just basically an outline drawing of a dog, and they get to colour it in with red and green so that I know that they've learned where they should and shouldn't touch a dog.
And what's your nirvana? What do you expect the child to do after they've turned up to your program? What do you expect to do once they get home?
Tell their parents how fabulous it was. And the amazing thing is, when I've done private lessons with this, I've had feedback from the parents telling me that their kids have told them, no, mummy, you mustn't do that. You mustn't touch the dog there. They don't like that. And look, it's doing this. So that means that it's, feeling this. So they do learn. Kids are amazing. I think kids are amazing. They just pick up all this stuff. They're little sponges. And I think a lot of them want to learn. I really do.
Should this be in the curriculum?
Yes. Yes.
Don't you think learning about dinosaurs or sharks or dolphins?
Sharks, absolutely. Most of Australia lives on the coastal fringe. Dinosaurs, yeah, because you're likely to have a T-Rex next door, aren't you? Yeah, and you're going to see a brontosaurus down the street and you need to know how to get away from that, sure, of course. There's nothing wrong with some history. I don't have any problem with that. But your child is likely to come into contact with a dog. So without any skills or tools that we can, that I've got available to teach, without those, if they don't know what to do, they could end up doing the wrong thing and end up really badly injured.
So in the first 5 minutes, you'll talk about maybe their dogs because they're interested about their dogs. What other outcomes will they get out of it?
The main part of the sessions are to teach the children about the signs and signals that dogs will generally give. Now, not every dog will give a warning. Generally, what we found is that the dogs that don't give warnings have learned that the warnings are ignored. So generally they'll go from seemingly okay to biting. And that's when, owners will say, I never saw that coming, or that was unprovoked. The unfortunate part about that is that, and I see this a lot in dogs that have been abused, they try desperately to give warnings. They just learn that no one's going to take any notice of them. So they're the ones that are harder to predict. But for the most part, the dog will show you how it's feeling. So there's a whole range of emotions, from things like, a bit of anxiety, minor discomfort, right up to where they've reached crisis, where they cannot get away. So along that thing, there'll be little signals that are given, and that's what we teach the children how to recognise. Now, hopefully, they will learn that right down at the anxiety and mild or minor discomfort end, they need to just leave that dog alone. Hopefully, because then that's a win-win for everybody, because the child's identified that that's not a great place to be, and the dog has learned that this person is listening, well, this other being in the room with me is paying attention to me, is giving me the respect and the dignity that I deserve, and I've already sort of hinted or intimated that I don't really want you around me, and they've listened and obeyed. That's all it is. So like I said in my other interview, it's not rocket science. This is not hard to learn. It's just being observant. That's all it is.
Can you give me one signal? I notice, and I think we did mention this before, I notice dogs lick their lips. What's that a sign of?
That is a very early warning sign of anxiety. So, and you sometimes see them yawn. It's not because they're tired. It's quite an exaggerated yawn. And when you see them do that, it's almost like a displacement, well, it is called a displacement activity, or they're trying to get rid of that nervous energy. So when they do that, and when you see that, respect that and leave them be. And, often I'll see that if I go to somebody's house, let's say there's a social thing on, I'll often, and sometimes people that aren't really aware of their dogs, they love them, sure, there's no question, but sometimes you'll see that they leave the dog in amongst, there's crowds of people at their house. Now that is really confronting for a dog. It's quite an anxious time for them, and they don't like that, because all of a sudden there's this massive invasion of their territory. So if you're going to have a party, you should really farm your dog out somewhere for the night. because that's very hard for them to deal with. And putting them in another room is okay, but they can hear all of that stuff. And so that's quite hard for them to deal with. And I'll often see dogs exhibiting really nervous behaviour, and you just, most of the time they can control that impulse and they're not going to bite anybody, but they're not happy. So you should do the right thing around your dog. But the big warning is that they'll give you is that yawning, that exaggerated yawn, and they do lick their lips. It's not because they're hungry.
And what would be your key message for this episode?
Learn how to watch your dog and learn how to understand what they're trying to tell you.